Hi everyone, my name is Nico and I'm the founder of TOA. I'm excited to hear the following conversation around measuring what matters in impact investing. Defining clear means to measuring impact has never been more crucial than now. And it's an honor to host another Leaps talk with Leaps by Bayer, the impact investment arm of Bayer. The talk series was born at last year's physical TOA festival in Berlin. It gathers great minds to discuss the challenges behind biotech innovation and investment. This is a truly important conversation to be having, not just in the light of the global pandemic we all have been experiencing. Due to the special circumstances of these times, this talk will be taking place virtually. And we're trying something new. We will be recording the talk in high quality video and then have a live Q&A with our audience and speakers in a virtual context as part of our TOA On Air series. I want to thank our thoughtful partners at Leaps by Bayer, as well as our speakers, Meik Wiking, CEO of the Happiness Research Institute, Agate Freimane, General Partner at Norrsken Venture Capital firm, as well as our moderator, broadcaster and author, Britt Wray. And I hope you're going to enjoy this conversation.
Hello and greetings from Zurich. My name is Jürgen Eckhart. I'm the head of Leaps by Bayer. First of all, thanks Nico. It's a great pleasure to continue our collaboration with TOA Open Air. Conversations like this help broaden our thinking about biotech investment and the future. Leaps by Bayer started 5 years ago with the mission to address 10 huge challenges, or leaps, that could change the world for better. With over 30 companies and around $1 billion in our portfolio, we look critically at how each new investment can deliver return for humanity, not just return on investment. But how can we measure impact? How can return for humanity become a measurable KPI? This is why I'm looking forward to this Leaps talk today, bringing together two organizations I greatly respect, Norrsken and the Happiness Research Institute. It's my pleasure to kick off things by introducing Meik Wiking, head of the Happiness Research Institute, a global leader in the compelling world of happiness research and a New York Times best-selling author.
So my name is Meik Wiking and I run the Happiness Research Institute here in Copenhagen. And I know when you hear the Happiness Research Institute, you probably imagine that we spend all day looking at puppies. Unfortunately, that is not the case. We look at studies, we look at data, we look at evidence. And basically, we try to have a scientific approach to happiness, well-being, and quality of life. So all the work we do here, all our projects, and basically my entire career is dedicated to three questions. So first of all, we try to understand how can we measure well-being. Secondly, why is it that some people are happier than others? And thirdly, how can we improve quality of life? And obviously, one way to improve quality of life is to cure diseases. We can see people who are sick are, of course, less happy. But which diseases should we cure first? Imagine we could cure one of two diseases. Imagine you have a red and a blue pill, and the red pill is the cure for Parkinson, and the blue pill is the cure for Alzheimer's disease. Which pill should you develop if you wanted to improve quality of life the most for mankind? So while you think about that, let me give you some good news and some bad news. The good news is that 10 years ago, the UN passed a happiness resolution. So that resolution asks all the countries of the world to focus more on well-being and see what they can do to improve quality of life for citizens. In these years, we're seeing countries doing exactly that. So in New Zealand, the Treasury now evaluates new government policies based on its ability to improve quality of life for its citizens. And we see well-being being put at the core of public policy in countries like the UK, in France, in Japan, in the United Arab Emirates, and of course famously Bhutan with their gross national happiness index. We also see agenda-setting organizations moving towards well-being. You have the organization called OECD that now have the Better Life Index. Now, it's an index with 11 indicators, and what is great about this index is that you can go and decide which factors matter most to you. It's classic factors like housing, jobs, education, but also health and life satisfaction. So now more than 100,000 people have gone in and said, what would I prioritize? What matters most to me? And what we can see is what matters most to people is life satisfaction. In the US, it's the top priority. In the UK, it's top priority. In Germany, it's top priority. And it's not just a Western thing. We can see it's also what people matters most to people in Japan, in South Korea, in Nigeria. So it's a global thing. And that study echoes the conversations I've been having with people around happiness for the past 10 years. I see we're all in pursuit of the same thing. Whether we are Danish or Latvian or American, we are first and foremost people. We're all looking for the good life. We're all in pursuit of happiness. And that's not a new thing. More than 2,000 years ago, the first happiness researcher, Aristotle, said that happiness is the ultimate aim for human existence. And I think that's still true today. Now, the bad news is that we are failing to convert wealth into well-being. We're richer than ever before, but the question is whether we are happier. So GDP levels have gone up, but so have sea levels, stress levels, and the level of inequality. And we are failing to convert wealth into well-being. We have decoupled quality of life from GDP per capita. In the US and China, we see GDP per capita levels have gone up in the past 10 years, and we see subjective well-being levels going down in the same period. Now, the country we get most visits from at the Happiness Research Institute is South Korea. South Korea have had a tremendous growth in terms of economic prosperity in the past 50, 60 years. They've gone from one of the poorest countries in the world to one of the richest countries in the world. But they're struggling with converting wealth into well-being. They currently have the highest suicide rate in OECD. So the question is, how do we invest in happiness? How do we secure good conditions for good lives? How do we ensure a happiness return on investment? How do we ensure that we get bang for our buck when we are making impact investments? That's the kind of questions we need to ask as countries, as investors, but also as individuals. So of course, one key question is, how do we measure well-being or happiness? Well, first we need to acknowledge that happiness is a wide, complex umbrella term. Agate has one idea of what happiness is. I might have another one. So what we need to do with complex umbrella terms is we need to break them down and look at different components. And that's whether we talk about happiness, well-being, quality of life, the good life, to thrive. All of those are complex, wide terms. The same is the American economy. When we talk about the American economy, we also break that down into growth, GDP per capita, inflation, unemployment rate, and so on. And that gives us a language to talk about how is the American economy doing. So that's also what we need to do with well-being or happiness. We need to break it down and zoom in on the individual components. So when we measure happiness, we look at an overall life satisfaction. We ask people to take a step back and evaluate their life overall. Are they satisfied with their lives? If they imagine the worst possible life they could live and the best possible life they could live, where do they feel they stand right now? That's a fairly stable answer people give us. They answer the same on Mondays as they do on Fridays, and it really takes a lot to move the needle on that one. It's different on another dimension, one we call the affective dimension. There we ask people what kind of emotions or what kind of mood they experience on a daily basis. So if you take yesterday, did you feel happy, optimistic, inspired? Did you feel loved? Or did you feel lonely, stressed, angry, or depressed? Now we can see there's a lot of volatility on that one. And of course, the two dimensions are connected. If you have a lot of everydays with a lot of positive emotions, you probably also report higher levels of life satisfaction, but they're not completely overlapping because you can have a lousy morning and still feel good about your life overall. The third dimension we always capture is a sense of purpose or meaning in life. So that builds on Aristotle's perception of happiness, and to him the good life was the meaningful life. So we break it down and we look at different components. And then we also acknowledge that happiness is subjective. There's actually only one person here who can tell us whether Agate is happy or not, and that is Agate. It's the same with depression, stress, loneliness. All of those terms are subjective terms. At the end of the day, it comes down to how do we as individuals experience our lives and the world. And then the third thing we do is we follow people over time. We follow large groups of people over time to see what happens with life satisfaction or with our mood when life happens. And when you follow large groups of people over a long period of time, people get married, people get divorced, people get promoted, people get fired. And we try to understand what is the average impact from different life events on, for example, life satisfaction. And that brings me to WALLY. WALLY stands for Wellbeing Adjusted Life Years. And it's a new metric we've developed. It's a metric that can measure a happiness return on investment. It's a metric that can predict potential leaps for humankind in terms of happiness. And it's a metric that provides a common currency where we can compare across vastly different investments. So one of the things we've done to develop WALLY is we've used large data sets. One data set is called SHARE, the Survey for Health, Aging and Retirement in Europe. It's a huge data set with more than 100,000 people in it, people that are 45 or older, that have been followed for more than 10 years. And because it's such a large group of seniors followed over 10 years, people get sick. People are diagnosed with Alzheimer's, with different forms of cancer, with depression, with Parkinson. So one woman who got diagnosed in the course of the study, let's call her Kathy, she was in her 50s, and usually she reported 9 or 10 when she was asked how satisfied with life she was. Suddenly she gets diagnosed with Parkinson, and she drops to 5 on a scale from 0 to 10 in terms of life satisfaction. Now, Kathy is just one of 2,500 in one study that is diagnosed with Parkinson. That means we can start to see what is the average impact from being diagnosed with Parkinson on life satisfaction. What is the actual experience of a patient? And this is actually key in the new metric. We build it on people's experiences. Not what we think it's like to have Parkinson or to sit in a wheelchair, but what is it actually like? What is the experience of the patient? And we can actually also go beyond the patient because we can see in some data sets who are married to who. That means we can start to see what is the average impact on your life satisfaction if your partner is diagnosed with Alzheimer's. We can also go beyond health because we can actually start to predict what would be the average impact on life satisfaction if we reduced air pollution in Paris to 0. And because we're building this on life satisfaction, we can use that as a common currency. We can start to compare what would be the average impact on life satisfaction if we reduced air pollution in Paris compared to finding a cure for Parkinson. So my hope is that we will start building this into impact investment. My hope is that we will start measuring what is the potential gain in happiness for each of the 17 SDGs. And my hope is that we will start measuring things in terms of a happiness return on investment. Because we know that what we measure matters. So my hope is that we start to measure what matters. And delivering the second lightning talk will be Agate Freimane, coming directly to us from Stockholm. Now, Agate is general partner at Norrsken VC, which is Europe's largest impact venture capital fund with over 100 million euros and 23 companies innovating business models in health, climate change, and more. She has started her career in finance, but eventually ventured into the startup world by building and investing in early stage startups. Welcome, Agate.
Thank you so much, Meik, for that warm introduction. And it's now my pleasure to take you deeper into the topic of impact investing. If we look at data like child mortality, poverty, illiteracy, then we have a really good reason to be very optimistic about the current state of the world, because all of these measures have dramatically improved over the last 3 decades. But as Meik alluded to, we're not quite happy. Today, it's difficult to open a newspaper without feeling that we live in a state of emergency. We're constantly faced with headlines like climate crises, political polarization, skyrocketing healthcare costs. Today, more people die from obesity than from starvation, and mental health issues are at all-time record high. At Norrsken, we believe that our best bet to solve some of these big and hard problems are entrepreneurs. And not only that, we truly believe that the companies solving some of the world's biggest challenges will also be the most valuable companies of tomorrow. Us as a society, we live in a complex world and we like to simplify things. And sometimes to simplify things, we put them in certain frames and boxes. But those can sometimes be unhelpful and false. Let me give you a couple of examples. For instance, you can have fast food or healthy food. You can't have both. You can either drive a fun car or an eco-friendly car. You can't have both. And unfortunately, when it comes to impact investing, it has also sometimes fallen the victim of this false binary framing. You can either make money or you can save the world. But that is no longer true. We believe that the most valuable companies of tomorrow will be the ones solving global challenges. And there is a lot of data to back that up, that we're moving away from the profit-only model to the profit plus impact model, or what we call the 2.0. And I could share a lot of data, but today I'll dive into the biggest and most powerful source of this change. And it's millennials. Millennials account for more than half of our workforce in Europe and the US, and they're not happy with business as usual anymore. An extensive study done by Deloitte interviewing millennials across 27 countries all around the world asked them, what is the purpose of business? 47% of the respondents said that the purpose of the business is to improve society and help us fight climate change. Or a staggering 87% of the respondents said that business performance should be measured in more than just financial returns. And if that's not enough, another different study said that 83% of MBA graduates would be willing to take a 15% pay cut in order to work for purpose-driven companies. I think you're starting to see the trend here, and that's the reason why we believe that purpose-driven companies have a real competitive advantage today. Millennials vote with their wallets every single day, but the companies are made out of people, they're made out of the talent. So if these companies can attract the best and brightest minds, they stand the chance to also be the best companies. So we at Norrsken try to accelerate this trend by backing early-stage entrepreneurs that are working on true innovations that can have a massive positive social and environmental impact. History tells us that it's the entrepreneurs, innovators, and creators that are the source of the true breakthroughs that leapfrog us into the next age. I mean, just think about the Wright brothers who invented airplanes. I would love to know how many times they were told that what they're doing is impossible. But we need that kind of relentless passion to really go into uncharted territories and be willing to prove that you can do something that hasn't been done before. But at the same time, corporates that are held responsible in front of their shareholders or NGOs, they're not well placed to take these bold, risky bets, because for every one that succeeds, so many more fail. As an early stage investor, we know the odds. We know that more than half of the ideas that we back will fail completely. And in the best case scenario, 1 out of 10 will succeed and scale globally. But for us, that's enough. That 1 out of 10 will way make up for the losses and more to really make it worthwhile pursuing this. And we need that kind of risk-taking when it comes to impact investing to find the next breakthrough solution. We also massively believe in the power of technology to be part of that solution. The average smartphone that you have in your pocket today is more powerful than the computer that took the first man to the moon. So if a smartphone can place a man on the moon, imagine what else it can do. So instead of creating another photo sharing app, we should be using the power of technology to lower the cost of healthcare or education to make it accessible to everyone all around the world. Which is why we try to find companies that have positive impact at the very core of the business model. Meik talked a lot about the importance of measuring things. When we look for opportunities, we want to make sure that the impact is so intertwined in the core of the business model that you can't separate the two, that for every unit of revenue that this company makes, they're also creating a unit of positive impact. Let me give you an example. One company that we have backed is called Ignitia. There are 1 billion small-scale farmers that live around the equator. Their livelihoods depend on their yearly harvests. However, if you manage to plant or harvest at the wrong time, you could lose your family's income for the whole year. What we don't know is that the weather forecasts for these regions are not reliable. So we backed a Swedish company that has come up with a weather forecast algorithm that is more than twice as accurate than the next best thing. How are they creating that into a business? Well, they're selling their weather forecast through text messages directly to these farmers. And as a result, these farmers are able to significantly improve their yields. They're able to bring more family at home and let that create a multiplier effect when it comes to impact. And if we look deeper at how to measure things, the framework that we use is something that we call theory of change. And I'll take one example that I'm sure all of you are familiar with, and that's Tesla. How would we measure the positive impact of Tesla? Well, first of all, we could look at the short term and the long term. So in the short term, we could say that for every car that Tesla sells, they're replacing a car that otherwise would have run on petrol or diesel. So we can accumulate what that means in terms of saved CO2 emissions. But that's the short term. The true, real impact of companies like Tesla is that today, every major automaker in the world is rolling out their electric fleets. And that's what we're after. We're looking after the companies that are creating immediate, measurable impact, but at the same time, they stand the chance to create a systematic change, resetting us to the new normal. And if there is one takeaway that I want you to have after this talk is that entrepreneurs are problem solvers. At any given point in time, they have jumped at the biggest problem that they want to solve. If 10 years ago that was how to make our online shopping more efficient, then today it's hard to shy away from bigger challenges than climate change. And entrepreneurs will do everything to solve these challenges. And next up, it's my pleasure to welcome our fantastic moderator into this conversation, Britt Wray, who's currently based in San Francisco Bay Area. She has a PhD in science communications from University of Copenhagen. And today she's a broadcaster and author researching the social and ethical entanglements of science and technology.
Thank you so much, Agate. It's an honor to be here with you and Meik today in order to dive deeper into how we can measure impact as well as hold it accountable when there's so much at stake for people and the planet. So let's kick things off with that concept you mentioned of Capitalism 2.0. I'd love to know how it differs from earlier models of impact investment as well as classical venture capitalism.
Well, historically, impact investing was sort of almost reserved only to the philanthropy segment of the market, that you were willing to give away money in order to generate some kind of positive impact in the world. However, that has changed, and to really move the needle and move trillions of dollars of capital, we need the main capital allocators to participate. We need our pension savings or insurance premiums to go into impact investing. And the only way we can do that is, again, by proving that it's not a false binary, that you can generate strong financial returns while creating positive impact. So that's the key that has changed, that now the idea that the main financial markets can participate in impact investing is slowly starting to catch on, but we're just at the very, very beginning of this trend. And to your second question, how does it differ from traditional venture capital? A lot of things are similar, but impact due diligence is one additional layer that we evaluate when we look at the companies. And so is the case that sometimes some venture capitalists, even 20 years ago, maybe accidentally invested in impact companies. But what's new is this emergence of dedicated impact private equity or venture capital funds, and that has only happened in the last couple of years.
Are there any consistent metrics that impact investors are using in order to track Capitalism 2.0? I mean, this, I imagine, would be quite difficult. So what are some of the challenges to doing something like that?
That's one of the main topics around impact investing today, is how can we have a measurement framework that really works for everyone and can be used for everyone, so that we have some kind of standardized framework. But the truth is that it's fairly complex. There are a lot of different frameworks out there, and depending on what's your investment strategy or what stage do you invest, are you an early stage investor or a late stage investor, the framework that you will use will differ greatly. So unfortunately today it's still extremely fragmented. At the same time, the good news is that it's a topic that is talked a lot about. A lot of different thought leadership groups are being brought together to really drive it into some kind of streamlined framework. But it's still going to take a lot of work to end up there.
And Mike, in your institute's recent report, you talk about how the Sustainable Development Goals have become this common currency for measuring impact. Now, what do you see as the main features and drawbacks of that framework?
Yeah, I think the SDGs could become a common currency. I think right now we actually have 17 different currency. I would hope that we would find some sort of overarching metric that we can hold the different SDGs up against. I think we're seeing with the SDGs the same thing that Agate was just describing in impact investing, that it's very fragmented. There are different metrics, and I think we need a unifier. I think we need a common currency that can sort of bridge the different goals we currently have. We have goals, but we don't have sustainable development priorities.
Okay, so in terms of getting a common metric that we can apply to measuring well-being, your institute, the Happiness Research Institute, has come up with this particular measure, the WALLY, which you mentioned. How is the investment and business community responding to the WALLY, and how are they letting you know that it's affecting their thinking?
Right, there is a great interest in well-being adjusted life years, also because the investment community is seeing what is happening with the policy-making community. So earlier on, I mentioned OECD and their Better Life Index. Actually, earlier today, two of my colleagues spoke with OECD, who are setting up a center on well-being. And they've evaluated now 29 of the 37 membership countries in OECD are now actually working with some sort of well-being metric or well-being statistics. And I think the investment community understands that this will trickle down. When there are policy in place, that will trickle down to the investment community, because there will be set up regulations that will affect the markets. I think we'll see with well-being the same things we've seen with sustainability and climate change, that there are regulations being put in place that will have an effect on companies, on markets, and on investments.
And Agate, when you take a step back and dream big about your work as an impact investor, what are some of the tools that you wish you had but do not yet in order to help you make wiser and better decisions about the companies that you're investing in? And when you consider those, who do you think needs to be involved in creating them in terms of the stakeholders that are influencing this?
That's a great question. First of all, a really good starting point would be if we sort of united behind one framework that the industry could use. But it needs to be flexible enough so that every investor or startup or another stakeholder can kind of adopt it to their own needs. But a good starting point would be at least that we have the same starting point. The second dream come true would be if impact companies made their impact data public. Then we could go into the area what Meik was talking about in his speech, where you can really look into the capital efficiency. For every dollar that I invest, which company yields me higher CO2 emission savings, and be able to compare it across different kind of variables. And probably third wish on my list would be also tools that make it easier for the startups to report, because the reality that we're dealing with, especially coming from the angle of backing really early stage startups, they're always understaffed, they always have their plates full, and they really need easy ways to get access to their impact data. So if there were any tools that helped them create their data easier, that would also be incredibly useful. And to your last question in terms of the stakeholders and actors, you need absolutely everyone involved. You need the funds, the institutional investors, the startups, the clients, every single stakeholder.
Those are great ideas. Thank you. Meik, what do you think that investors can do to help ensure that the companies they pour money into are accountable to their impact for a positive societal and environmental benefit, not just at the point of investment, but really in the long run? How can we make this durable over time?
I think the best thing we can do is secure independent longitudinal studies where we follow people over time to see that this is not just a short-term impact that companies or technologies or solutions are creating, but we're actually seeing this long-term, and also that it's coming from an independent data source. Obviously, companies have a self-interest in saying, listen, guys, we are delivering happiness. I think that's the ultimate promise of a lot of companies. But we need to have that from an independent source that follows people over time. If I can just add one thing to what Agate mentioned earlier in her talk, which I thought was really, really interesting, the point around MBAs being willing to work for a smaller salary if they're working for a company that is purpose-driven. We can also see when we look at what drives job satisfaction. If we look at your relationship with your boss, if your relationship with your colleagues, sense of purpose, sense of mastery, and a lot of different factors. When we look in Denmark and also in Norway, where we've done similar studies, we can see the key predictor of whether people are satisfied with their jobs is whether they have a sense of purpose and meaning in their work. It's on top of the list every year we do this study. So people will not only work more actually for less, but they also have a larger sense of job satisfaction if they work for companies that are driven by purpose.
The COVID-19 pandemic has stimulated greater interest in sustainable portfolios as nations and societies try to build back better. And I'm wondering if you've noticed any trends for this that relate to impact that the pandemic has amplified that you're excited about.
Yeah, great question. We really think that pandemic has sort of shown impact investing in new lights. And I have to take sort of a step back of how do we look at startups. We sort of classify startups in two buckets. There are the painkillers. Those are the startups that are solving real pain that you feel every day unless you take your painkiller. And then there are the vitamins, the nice to haves. It's good to take your vitamins, but if you forget to take it on any given day, you're not going to feel the real pain. When it comes to impact investing, these startups are addressing real pain points. And when it comes to economic downturns, what are you going to cut first? If you have to make personal budget choices, or if you're a big corporate who has to decide where to make your budget cuts, are you going to first go for the vitamins or the painkillers? The likelihood is that you're probably going to first go for the vitamins, which basically implies that impact investing is a lot more resilient. And we've already seen it firsthand on our portfolio. To be very honest with you, when we went into the corona pandemic, we were expecting to see much worse results, and we've been positively surprised to see the resilience of the startups in our portfolio. And I truly believe that one of those reasons is because those startups are painkillers and not vitamins for those that they serve.
Can you give us an example of what one of those core painkillers is in terms of how a company actually implements it right now?
There are many examples across all the different industries. I can give you one example of a recent company that we have invested in. So data is exploding all around the world. It's growing exponentially, and that also means that we have bigger demand for physical data centers. But the environmental footprint of the whole data center industry is growing at an alarming rate, and it's now almost on par with the whole airline industry. So we need better solutions. We recently backed a company that makes data center cooling a lot more efficient, cuts CO2 emissions by 50%, saves 99% of the water versus the next best thing, saves 85% of the space. That's a real painkiller because you're solving someone's pain point, first in terms of cost, but two, also in terms of environmental footprint. So if you had to make budget cuts, it's very unlikely that this is the solution that you're gonna cut out of your company purchases.
And Meik, how about in the impact measurement space? Have you noticed any trends since the corona pandemic has set in that's changing the way people are thinking about doing that work?
Yeah, I think one of the main changes we're seeing is a return to sort of the original definition of health that the WHO put forward in I think 48, that health is not just the absence of disease, but it's full mental, physical, and social well-being. I think the social aspect, the mental aspect have been overlooked in decades, but I think that the current pandemic has shown us the importance of connecting with other people, of not being isolated socially, and also how mental health is a key driver in our overall well-being. So there's, I think, big discussion around that, how we weigh the different dimensions. And I think there is a change, especially I think in Denmark, in that regard, in a questioning of how we measure and evaluate different treatments. I think we've been overlooking and not valuing enough the social and mental aspects when we are looking at different treatment options, for instance.
Something I find really fascinating with your work, Meik, is that you quantify subjective well-being, which is a very difficult thing to be able to hone in on in a quantifiable way. And then, it raises the question, what is non-subjective well-being? Is there any such thing as objective well-being? And is that something that we need to consider when we're making huge decisions for populations about what it means to invest in services and products that will affect their lives?
So you're right. I mean, my work is doing what Galileo Galilei talked about, measure the measurable and make the unmeasurable measurable. We are trying to quantify really subjective, tricky phenomenons. But we can also see that the subjective well-being metrics connect with objective metrics, as you described. So we see our subjective well-being metrics are predictive of mortality. So, for example, in the UK, they have a study where 8,000 seniors have been followed over 5 years, and we can see in the happier part of the sample, there's simply a lower mortality rate, also when we control for health status in the beginning of the study. We can also see subjective well-being levels are predictive of suicidal behavior. There is a large Finnish study where 30,000 people were followed over several decades. And also when you control for socioeconomics and gender and all sorts of different predictors of suicide, there's a 7-time greater risk of suicide among the ones that state they are unhappy. So we do see a lot of connections between the objective metrics and the subjective ones.
Agate, what makes you most hopeful at this point in terms of how you're seeing the impact investment field mature?
It's a great question. I think what gives me a lot of encouragement and hope is going back to the point that I really see that impact investing is slowly becoming mainstream. I think it's becoming more understood, but also there are more and more market participants that want to invest in impact investing. We were extremely pleased to see that some of the investors in our fund were pension funds and insurance companies who are return driven, but that the message resonates with them, that you actually can create financial returns while creating positive impact. And I really think that this is a trend that's only going to accelerate for the years to come.
Thank you both so much for an enlightening and, as I feel, hopeful talk about what we can do with these tools and the impact investment field as we try to address some of society's biggest problems. And now, the audience, I'd like to invite you to the live Q&A session. In order to join, all you need to do is refresh your browser now.